River watershed. And we are glad to have you with us today as we look at models of regional coordination and hopefully start to identify some possible strategies that we might use in the Neponset watershed. So we're really excited with three incredible speakers with a lot of experience in this particular area that we can learn from across our state. So we will hear from those three speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A and a panel discussion with each of them, and then we'll do some next steps and let you go on your way and hopefully come away with some really great insights on some resources and tools and opportunities that we might have to employ here in our region. So with that, I will pass it over to Radoshi. Are you next, or
Actually,
is Carrie next? I'm sorry.
sneak in before Radoshi.
Oh,
Thanks, Karen. So we are going to
sure.
record today's meeting for those for members of the collaborative who were not able to make it today. Just some housekeeping. We'd love it if you could rename yourself in Zoom. Keep yourself on mute so that we only have one person talking at a time. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time, but we will be having a Q&A session later in the program. So first, I just wanted to orient everybody to the project that this technical assistance workshop is part of. So we are currently in phase 2 of the Resilient Neponset Climate Resilience Project. And this technical assistance workshop is part of the Municipal Climate Collaborative. As part of the collaborative, we are working on a work plan and a roadmap to identify areas where Neponset River municipalities can work together on regional climate adaptation projects. And as part of that work that we've been doing over the course of the last almost 3 years now, one topic that has come up in a couple of different areas is sort of how do we coordinate these types of projects regionally? Does that entail a regional coordinator or is there some other way? And so that is the reason that we chose today's topic. And what the collaborative is what I just said, and I forgot I had this slide coming up. So, we really do want to make sure that we're working together, but we know that towns don't have the resources necessarily to embark on that. So, so this project aims to facilitate that and come up with ideas to help support towns in this work. And now I'll turn it over to Radoshi.
Thank you, Carrie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Radoshi Sinha. I'm an environmental planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. Thank you for joining us. Before we hear from the speakers, these are some of the broad workshop goals that we have for today, what we're looking to get out of the sessions and the discussions that we'll have with you later. To explore the different models of regional coordination and down the line potentially identify the best fit for this region, which is the Neponset. I understand the key considerations of a regional coordinator's role and what goes into regional coordination, as well as understand the benefits and challenges and the multifaceted nature of regional coordination. And with that, just to set the scene and for the context, we'd like to have a very quick Zoom poll to hear from all of you of what it is that you want to see. So Ian, I'd request you to please open it up. And if you could just fill this out, and we'll take a couple of seconds before we get into the speaker series.
Folks should hopefully be seeing it now.
Thank you, Ian.
Looks like the results are trickling in. Let me know how long you want to go, Doshi.
I think just a few more seconds and we should be good to go. All right, great.
Okay, here we go. Closing the poll. And hopefully everybody can now see the results.
Great. We'll be sharing this out later, but this is just to set the context and the scene for, what we are going to hear about and what all of you want to hear about. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker. Ben Cares is an urban planner and the Director of Housing and Community Development with the City of Chelsea. Ben has led several climate resilience and sustainability programs and initiatives on behalf of the city, including the Chelsea Microgrid, Urban Heat Mitigation Cool Block Effort, the Island End River Coastal Resilience Project, and has been a longstanding member of the Resilient Mystic Collaborative and other regional climate bodies. Ben oversees an array of housing and community development programming for the city, including affordable housing and development, economic development, workforce development, transportation and transit planning, urban design and placemaking, federal and state grant oversight, and also represents Chelsea for the North Suffolk Office of Resilience and Sustainability, which is shared between Winthrop, Revere, and Chelsea. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to hear from you. And before I hand it over to Ben, I'd just like to request everyone to reserve their questions until the end of all the speaker sessions, but feel free to put the questions in the chat as you see fit.
Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to speak on behalf of the North Suffolk Office of Resiliency and Sustainability as a regional model for how a regional climate office can look and how a regional office approaches both sustainability principles, resiliency principles, and thinks a little bit about how to regionalize those, but also how does it work as an engine to produce content on an individual level. And so just to level set everybody, this is a Bar Foundation funded office. We've received a couple of grants now to fund two primary positions of the office, a resiliency manager and a sustainability manager. And it is co-led by the municipalities of Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. So we have been very lucky to have this opportunity, and we do feel that this has been a major benefit regionally for us. And I'm excited to share a little bit more details on it. So let's move on to the next slide. So just to sort of give an overview of that team that's comprising this office. So myself and the deputy director of this department, Emily Granoff, oversee the Chelsea portion of the North Suffolk office. And then we're joined with Tom and town manager Marino from Revere and Winthrop respectively that guide the initiatives and their portion of the office itself. And then right now our current managers of the NSource team are Abderzak Azib, who's our sustainability manager, focusing predominantly on energy efficiency, decarbonization, electric vehicle charging. We'll talk a little bit more about his scope of work there. And then Kristen Homier, who's our resiliency manager, handling the majority of natural hazards, flooding, extreme heat, and the like. Next slide, please. Just to give people a geographic lens into the NSource region, it's Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. And so in our case, we are connected geographically to one another. I think that, part of the benefit here was that Chelsea had a lot of activity in the climate space in resiliency and sustainability, as did Revere. We think that, Winthrop is a place that's catching up in that regard. So hugging them all in together made sense geographically. And I think from our vantage point, it's been manageable to have three municipalities. I think any more would potentially be a little bit challenging. So having three primary municipalities has worked well, I would say. Next slide, please. So just sort of the tenets and the mission of the North Suffolk Office of Resiliency and Sustainability. So we seek to advance projects and enact policies that are dealing with climate change. They're protecting people, critical infrastructure, and the environment from climate impacts. We're working to safeguard vulnerable areas, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, handle air pollution, and deal with those factors that are actually affecting these communities, and in particular, those vulnerable demographics, environmental justice communities, which we have our fair share of here in Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. I think this third bullet point is really important, and I think a very core principle of why the office was created, which is basically to build the capacity of municipal officials, community organizations, and residents to better prepare for and respond to climate hazards and climate-driven events. I think that is really what the ask was when we went and sought this money, was because we weren't able to stand up individual managers for resiliency and sustainability in every community. And so there's a cost sharing benefit there, and a little bit of efficiency. But we can talk a little bit more about how that's played out over time. The office is in general oriented towards practical, actionable solutions that bring multiple benefits to residents. And so we do try to create co-benefits. We recognize that there's a lot of intersectionality with climate resiliency and sustainability with our economy, with housing, with kind of you name it. And so we do our best to craft solutions and tackle projects that are going to honor those intersectionalities while also dealing with those primary hazards of concerns, and then sectors of concerns that are contributing to greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. The history of NSORS is that between 2015 and 2020, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop completed their MVP Community Resiliency Building Workshop, became green communities, were on the Metro Mayor's Climate Task Force. So they were showing some good progress towards climate resiliency and sustainability initiatives. With that momentum, the region, along with some external partners, approached the Barr Foundation for funding, and the NSORS office was established in 2021. 2022 to 2023, some key reports that were created through the office was the Zero Carbon Action Plan, as well as the NSORS Resiliency and Community Preparedness Report. So that Zero Carbon Action Plan has been a nice roadmap for us in terms of our sustainability initiatives regionally. And then that Resiliency and Community Preparedness Report was just a very specific analysis of beyond environmental justice community designations, what are some of the other factors that are contributing to vulnerabilities in our communities, and how do we best prepare for that? So kind of taking what you'd find in a hazard mitigation plan, but attaching social vulnerability indicators to it and getting a little bit more specific about community cohesion and building. In 2024, that is when I returned to Chelsea and took my place as the Director of Housing and Community Development. Before my time, there had been obviously a lot going on with federal funding and other priorities. And so there was sort of a dip in the office in terms of full staffing. And so in 2024, we've fully restaffed the office. We are reinstating those broader regional partnerships, and we've continued the momentum with all of our resiliency and sustainability projects. Next slide, please. So all of the NSORS communities were already engaged, like I said, in comprehensive planning efforts. So they were ready and had the infrastructure and some startup programs and activities for these managers to take on when the office was formed. They needed additional personnel to help drive those initiatives forward. They applied to the Barr Foundation. And what we actually put together was an intermunicipal agreement between all three communities that helps keep sort of the human resource element intact. It states that the positions are actually City of Chelsea employees. So you do need one of your municipalities to be the kind of fiscal and HR steward. And then we also have contributions from the communities that match the grant to help keep the office going, and pay for those salaries and those contract services and those benefits that make the office a possibility. Next slide, please. We are focusing sort of specifically on a handful of climate vulnerabilities. So flooding is very important for Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. If you're if you know their geography, then you know that they are predominantly surrounded by water and or have significant flood pathways impacting critical infrastructure and economic sectors and housing. We're trying to reduce urban heat island impacts with more tree canopy. At least definitely Chelsea and Revere are, post-industrial and have a lot of areas in the city that have suffered from a lack of open space, green space, and tree canopy. Um, I believe that both Revere and Chelsea and probably Winthrop as well have combined sewer systems or have utility infrastructure that need to deal with more pronounced stormwater. We're also implementing a lot of green infrastructure where we can within the right of way. We are addressing that intersectionality of modal shifts and greenhouse gas reductions. And so we are focusing and we partner very closely with our traffic and transportation colleagues on calming traffic and improving safety, as well as adding public amenities and bike paths, protected sidewalks, waterfront access. We've got that environmental justice component of bringing people to these waterfronts. And right now, there's a lot of focus, if you've been in touch on this regard, with designated poor areas and in general our waterfront districts in Chelsea and Revere and even Winthrop, in terms of imagining these industrial waterfronts as a place that has access, but also have those better and higher uses that are going to bring jobs to our economy, while also trying to instate resiliency efforts on those properties against flooding. So thank you. Specifically right now, what we're focusing on in terms of sustainability projects, Chelsea has had a long term project. Stephen Brody says, what do you mean by calm traffic? I'll just grab that one really quick. Just trying to reduce speeding and increase safety in general. That's really just what that one is. That one is. We have a microgrid project. For those that know what a microgrid project is or don't, I will just reiterate it, is that it can be anything as small as a solar panel array attached to an external battery or some type of battery source. What that does is it allows for a grid island, as it were, that can be disconnected from that sort of traditional distribution network, like a National Grid Eversource type grid. And it increases the resiliency of the building that it's instated on. So right now we've got solar panels on our DPW yard. We've got an external battery hopefully getting implemented here at City Hall in the next year or so, as well as an external battery at the police station. All of this is just building out infrastructure so that we can have a municipal-wide microgrid system. The lofty sort of desire for that is that we would have something that is completely separate from the grid, and could potentially also generate electricity via those solar panels, and potentially lead to integration with our municipal aggregation program or community solar program. Revere just launched a curbside composting pilot, which those residents are very excited about, and that's something that they've been wanting for a long time. We continue to apply for energy efficiency conservation block grants. Right now, we're focusing our current block grant on looking at governance and business model structures for the microgrid system. And then we are working towards improving and also just sort of crafting our outreach efforts and reporting requirements and stewardship with our building energy reduction disclosure, which the city of Chelsea passed an ordinance on, but we're working with the state to see what that reporting is going to look like. And then we're crafting kind of that outreach to those covered properties, those commercial properties that need to decarbonize, and can use some assistance in that regard. For resiliency projects, we are one of the first pilot MVP 2.0 communities. That's been an interesting exercise in sort of bringing together residents and creating, a sort of coalition or a pilot coalition on climate issues, and digging really deep down on what does the community perceive to be the major issues. And that will culminate to a seed project or an implementation project. And that'll be completely driven by the MVP 2.0, the focus group that we put together and their decision making. We've got Eastern Avenue flood mitigation. If you're if you're familiar with Chelsea or not, there are quite a few there's a tank farm and the pre-flight parking on the right-hand side of Chelsea. Those properties along Eastern Avenue, we're working with them to instate flood mitigation on property, but also in the public right-of-way. We've been working a really long time at the Mary C. Burke School on their heat mitigation. They did a white roof there. We're doing some tree canopy expansion, and we're also looking at potentially putting in solar panels on those parking lots there. And we're also working with our Chelsea Housing Authority group to implement a white roof on one of the Chelsea Housing Authority properties. Next slide, please. Some of the sort of regional projects that have come out of the office are the North Suffolk Electrical Vehicle Plan. That's been helpful to think about next steps and priority areas for electrical vehicle expansion. We've got our Community Solutions Program, which is a partnership with the utility companies to identify and implement energy efficiency projects. We just hired an energy advocate under that program. Um, we continue to designate ourselves as green communities and to leverage that program. Right now, Chelsea, for example, is leveraging that for microgrid grant funding. We're working with the Mystic River Watershed Association on a tree trenches project, so that green infrastructure. We continue to serve in a capacity on the Wicked Cool Mystic initiatives. We belong to the Lower Mystic Resiliency Hub Network, which is working on critical infrastructure, flood resiliency, stormwater, heat for the Lower Mystic area. And then the office helps to staff the Belle Isle Marsh Regional Stakeholders Group. And so, I think that last bullet point is a really good defender of the office, because there are municipalities that just don't have that local stewardship or sort of expertise to guide resident-led groups in resiliency initiatives. And this has been really successful in sort of giving more teeth to that stakeholder group. Next slide, please. In general, the goals of the office and what we think about when we're talking about strategic planning is, we want to advance at least one large scale and one smaller scale project in each community that accomplishes key resiliency goals. We want to prioritize resiliency and sustainability efforts that touch on emergency preparedness and social resiliency and community connectedness in all 3 municipalities, and even that connectivity to the broader region. And we want to advance the priority projects from the Zero Carbon Action Plan that moves us toward a regional goal of net zero by 2050. We also want to be sort of a hub for information sharing, whether that's other municipalities or resident-led groups or adjacent bodies and coalitions that want to talk about resiliency and sustainability and how to handle that at the municipal level. In terms of the future of the NSOAR's office, we have to continuously identify whether or not the Bar Foundation or other, internal funding sources or other external funding sources are going to fund those positions. Right now, we're intact with this office until I would say probably around mid-2027. We want to continue working on our Zero Carbon Action Plan and get more specific within each municipality about what needs to happen to reach that goal. And we just want to have measurable progress and earnest progress towards reducing residents and our critical infrastructure, its exposure to climate hazards, specifically flooding and extreme heat. Thank you. And I would say, I think that this is probably the most important slide, and I would say, these are the lessons that we're learning running a regional office. It seems that we need definitely more regional collaboration beyond the NSOAR's office. So we're accomplishing that through other stakeholder groups like the Saugus Pine River Advocate for Regional Resiliency Group. We mentioned the Belle Isle Marsh Working Group. We're putting together a Mill Creek Working Group, and then the Resilient Mystic Collaborative and Lower Mystic efforts. So, with or without NSOAR's, we're hoping that this office brings attention to these issues and sort of breathes life and enables those stakeholder groups to continue onward with or without NSOAR's. And we're also hoping to coordinate file sharing and sort of information banks between the 3 communities, because that's a really important part of it is, Chelsea may be working on things that Winthrop is really hoping to do, or Revere's working on something that Chelsea's really wanting to do. And so having that very focused information sharing intact is really important. And then we also want to be proactive as much as we can. I think that in municipal work, we can be very reactive and it's just, oh, this grant is here, so we must apply for it. But we want to try and scope out, you know, an efficient grant program cycle over the next, 5 to 10 years, and really channel and tackle priority issues instead of trying to do it all at once, because it can be very overwhelming in this space, I think, as many of us know. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. I think all of us learned a lot, and thank you for sharing what NSource does as well. I'm sure we'll have quite a lot of discussion and questions around that afterwards. With that, I will introduce two of our speakers from the Pioneer Valley Planning Council. Ken Comia is the Deputy Director of the Land Use and Environment Department at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, PVPC, where he provides technical land use planning and zoning assistance to 43 communities in the Springfield metropolitan area. His work focuses on comprehensive participatory and municipal planning services, including visioning processes, regulatory development, permitting streamlining, and development review. Before joining PVPC, Ken served as the first town planner and conservation agent for Southbridge, Massachusetts. He also worked as a land use planner in Central Florida at both the city and county levels and held positions in New York City and Boston, contributing to projects in transportation, parks and open space, and affordable housing. Ken is an AICP accredited planner and serves as the vice president of the American Planning Association's Massachusetts chapter. We are also joined by Angela Panascion, who is a senior environmental planner at PVPC. Her role at PVPC includes serving as the non-point source coordinator for Hampton and Hampshire County, supporting municipalities with both the MVP 1.0 and 2.0 planning process and administering MVP action grants for municipalities as project manager, assisting the Connecticut River Stormwater Committee with public education and outreach under the MS4 permit and supporting Western Mass communities with the much needed service of conservation agent under PVPC's Community Compact. Prior to joining PVPC, she worked as the conservation director for the town of Charlton and conservation agent and stormwater coordinator for the town of Palmer. Earlier, she has also served as the conservation agent for her hometown of Brimfield, chair of the Brimfield Conservation Commission, and chair of Brimfield's Open Space Committee. Ken and Angela, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Rodoshi. I'm going to make it quick because I think Angela's presentation will probably be a lot more interesting to you. But I do love to talk about some of the work that PVPC does with regards to building capacity. I think it's been mentioned. I think it's important, especially for our volunteers, our volunteer board members who we rely on to make decisions that are hopefully, warranted in some good science and good data, especially when it comes to development review or even zoning amendments. So with that said, PVPC since 2005 has had what we call the Planning Board Assistance Program, or what also is basically municipal planning services, and what I do there. Benefits of the program include ensuring that we're able to, with the communities that have used the fee for service, so they typically have a budget that comes from their town meeting or town council, to establish a fund to pay off our consulting services here at the Planning Commission. PVPC is one of 13 regional planning agencies, of which some of, including MAPC, who is hosting this, some of which provide these planning services to communities that do not have planning staff, and often rely on these volunteers to do a lot of this planning work. And so this makes up for that. Understanding that we have land use staff here at the PVPC that work with individual communities and are able to go through the responsibilities of what a planning board probably would be responsible for, and that's development review, zoning bylaw amendments, and oftentimes interacting with grant programs or state programs that may be new. Green Communities is an example, and have no idea of how to navigate that. And so, a professional planner at that level can help, provide some of that guidance. Other benefits, decision making, understanding that you have professional planners helping a planning board through reading their zoning, through understanding some of the impacts and best practices that may be employed elsewhere or regionally. Oftentimes at a public hearing, um, that type of information for a planning board is very important. And then optimizing resource allocation, understanding what a planning board does and what a planning department, if there was a planning staff, allows us to really figure out how to make it more efficient, especially if we have, in our case here at PVPC for this fiscal year, we have 6 communities that are doing that. Next, please. Typical scope of services, I briefly talked about it: zoning bylaw updates and reviews, development review, intake and tracking systems, understanding that oftentimes, especially if there's a permitted project coming on board, there are probably going to be comments related to the permitting process and how either onerous or easy it is to get through. If it is easier to get through, it probably is. The planning board has dust off my shoulders, probably talk to PVPC to talk about how to improve permitting expedience, either through the various programs that the state provides, in addition to best practices that are employed elsewhere. Smart growth and plan implementation. You have a comprehensive plan or housing production plan, of which the planning boards are usually responsible for adopting. Understanding that there are some strategies in there that your professional planner can help do and go through. Capacity building, interpretation of are the local regulations and the state regulations. In the past 3 years, there have been significant changes at the state level at the Zoning Act regarding housing particularly. And another big thing that's coming up is going to be energy siting that our planning boards are going to have to interact with as far as the permitting process that they may have been familiar with before, but now are going to have to be thinking about it differently. Will that require a zoning bylaw amendment? Our professional planners would likely be able to help them navigate some of the thinking around there. And then lastly, like I said, absent a full-time planner, but oftentimes having a town administrator or an executive assistant for the select board, which is the only paid staff person that may be at a part-time level. Some of these programs that are offered to municipalities for benefits, like green communities or even the MVP program, sometimes you need to have some guidance from the regional planning agency. And I know Angela can speak to that a little more clearly. But that's what we do with planning board assistants. Next, please. One of the success stories that I love to share is Hadley has been utilizing the planning board assistance since 2005. Hadley is a community that is buttressed between the city of Northampton and the town of Amherst, and right along the Route 9 corridor over there. And there's a lot of encroachment with the University of Massachusetts with regards to housing. Having been part of those planning board meetings in the past, it can get very specific as to a lot of the conversations that Amherst might be having or the city of Northampton might be having with relation to housing development. And here is Hadley with its rural, if you look to the north and south of Route 9 and how to navigate that. But the planning board has been utilizing PVPC for some of the services to navigate the understanding of the development, as well as providing them with best practices, mostly related to site plans. What we've done since 2005 is help them reformat the zoning bylaws to align with the best practices, review subdivision regulations. PVPC put together a model subdivision regulation in 2019 that's reflective of ensuring MS4 compliance and more appropriate with some of the stormwater considerations that have not yet, or have since then been even expanded more. Implementing smart growth strategies, understanding that they have a route corridor in the middle of town that has some commercial activity that probably needs to be rethought of, especially with regards to the housing crisis. And so navigating land use studies with regards to that, enhancing development review processes where everything was going before them with a special permit, now is not the case, right? So now there is a little more expectability with permits. And then master plan updates. So understanding that we help them with their master plan update. We're also able to help navigate some of those implementable strategies. And so this is something that is easily doable in many of the other communities that we offer this service in. And I think it's just a matter of understanding what we do when we're not doing the planning board assistance, when we're not working individually with these communities. We are comprehensive planners. We are land use planners. We know the MVP program. We know the Green Communities program, or we have people like Angela on staff that can help us navigate some of that. And with regards to that, it's understanding how we may be thinking at the regional level when we're doing some of our other work. We're able to fine tune how we present the case to the town, especially when it comes to the planning board who makes those very important decisions. And next slide, which I believe is my last slide. I'm happy to have been invited. Thank you for the invitation. And I turn it over to Angela. Thank you.
Next slide. So I'll begin by talking about old grant Pioneer Valley had, the compact for Pioneer Valley conservation, and my current attempts to revive it. Next slide. The Pioneer Valley Conservation Compact was established in 2013 to provide technical assistance to land trusts, conservation commissions, specifically for open space and wetlands protection. The main objectives at the time were to provide, qualified, affordable, professional conservation services, especially to smaller rural communities that lack staff. To improve the capacity of these municipalities and land trusts to protect open space, natural resources, increase the scope and the quality of conservation services to residents through different types of outreach, build capacity within the towns and regionally to apply for grants and to allow them to be more competitive in grant applications, avoid any sort of liability for unmet statutory requirements of the Wetlands Protection Act. It's a common occurrence in Western Massachusetts for boards and committees to not have quorum and not act on filings to the Conservation Commission in a timely manner, so that often results in loss of local control over wetland permittings, and they go right to DEP. If a Concom doesn't act within 60 days, that's what happens. So we're trying to prevent that and allow more local oversight, because that's the most important. There's one DEP circuit rider for the 161 Western Mass communities, so it's very unfeasible for that one person to be able to assist individuals, especially if DP takes over. And yeah, just providing guidance, helping with policies, developing bylaws. Next slide, please. So when it first started, the dues were $1,500 annually. There were 3 communities that originally bought in. It was also supplemented through the community compact grant. And Pioneer Valley Planning Commission used its existing nonprofit, the Pioneer Valley Region Venture Centers, as the overseeing sort of operational oversight committee. Next slide, please. So again, the open space and environmental resource protection services, the compact ordered was working with the commission and other municipal departments, including highway, open space committee, parks department, to help maintain the municipality's open space and recreation plans. Also attending conservation commission meetings, presenting trainings and materials on the Wetlands Protection Act, Rivers Protection Act, assisting with the interpretation of environmental regulations, working with the land trusts and the conservation commissions to identify high area parcels for protection, identifying sources both within the community and through grants to acquire and protect open space. And then again, being persistent and including climate impacts into land acquisition considerations. Next slide, please. The technical support also included conducting baseline surveys and holding and monitoring conservation restrictions. For those of you that aren't familiar, a baseline survey is when a land trust or a Concom first acquires a piece of land and you walk the boundaries, survey the meets and bounds, make sure there's no encroachment or no other studies, so you know the baseline of the land you just acquired. Also, like I said, there was grant writing, GIS mapping and prioritization of priority parcels for acquisition, land management plans, which included forest management plans to allow active management of large wooded areas, and a lot of outreach to landowners and work with different RCPs, regional conservation programs. We did some work with MassCon as well, and held co-events such as we had a Woman in the Woods talk, which was woman property owners that we invited. We hosted another woods forum where people walked an active timber site to learn about how forestry is good and management is good, though it might look a little scary at first. So getting people out there to see what's happening and teaching them about it is helping. And we also did some conservation speed dating workshops too, which were really interesting. And those were with large property owners and DCR service foresters and other foresters, so they could talk about land and get ideas of different programs available. Next slide, please. Yes, we did develop also as part of this some brochures and pamphlets that focused on how to recruit and keep conservation commissioners, because they are all volunteers. Conservation restriction stewardship guidance document, and then a guidance document on building and maintaining trails, which also included a generic bundled notice of intent for conservation commissions to use to allow them to work on their own trails and maintain their own trails without constantly having to file with themselves. So it covered a broader array of options. Next slide. And again, there was all the wetlands permitting assistance, attend meetings when needed, help with minutes and agendas, review orders of conditions, monitor compliance, assist with violation investigations, assist with ticketing That's a big thing. A lot of conservation commissions who do have the ability to fine are often intimidated by it and are not familiar with the Chapter 40B process. So providing assistance there in coordination, of course, with their legal counsel. But just how to craft tickets that meet the regulations that won't get thrown out of court. And then, reviewing stormwaters and any comments DEP has. Next slide. And again, the outcomes of the program were increased protection of wetlands, increased protection of open space, and increased community access to open space. It did slowly fizzle out previously. Part of it was due to staff turnover, and part of it was due to what some of the smaller rural communities felt was high dues, the 1,500. So that's why I have currently been exploring other options. On the past 2 years, I've been using local technical assistant requests to help our municipalities and also working through MVP grants, working with the town of Williamsburg to do their first wetlands bylaw, worked with the town of Ware to pass their first stormwater bylaw, holding quarterly meetings in collaboration with the Mass Society of Municipal Conservation Professionals in Western Mass to provide an outlet for agents and other staff to gather and discuss important wetland issues. Also assisting Goshen, Chester, and Middlefield with developing bundled notices of intent for their highway department, not only to maintain existing roads, but also incorporating green infrastructure and environmentally sensitive site design in the road planning and removing point source discharges through using PVPC's green infrastructure BNP guidance. So it's chains of infiltration in lieu of chains of connected catch basins. And also, yes, the last two things right now, working with towns on their ecological restoration notices of intent for land management. I am working with the town of Holland for Hamilton Reservoir and town of Ware on Snow Pond and town of Brimfield on Lake Sheridan. So right now, like I said, they would request, 15 to 20 hours of local technical assistance, but I am working through a way to find lower dues and something to offset the cost to expand and continue this service. As the more it's provided and the more other communities learn of it, the more emails I receive. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Ken and Angela. I think that was really insightful, and we learned a lot about the shared services PVPC provides. Thank you. With that, I will introduce our final speaker for this panel, Nirasha Kumar. Niri Kumar is a software engineer turned online influencer turned climate champion. She participated in the Metro West Climate Equity Project as a community liaison. After working on the Climate Equity Project, Niri joined the city of Framingham and the town of Natick to increase participation in mass save energy efficiency programs, especially among renters, landlords, moderate income households, language isolated households, and small businesses. She continues to work with the town of Natick, being trained on racial equity for municipalities and closing the distance to environmental justice neighborhoods. Niri, we are very glad to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Hiroshi. Going to say there's going to be an influx of images, but in lieu of coffee, that's going to help us all stay awake. So I feel the pictures speak louder than anything I can probably say, but I'm going to just give a little rundown of what Hiroshi spoke about. So I started working as a community liaison in the climate equity project. And for me, it was a little eye-opening because while I'm a person of color and immigrant, it still exposed me that there were lots of other communities that I still didn't know about. So working on that exposed me to people of different ages, of people of different abilities, of different income levels, and also different languages. So that itself, working on the project, was pretty eye-opening. One of the things that we did explore was learning how climate impacts different communities in different ways. Things that we pass as, oh, how it would impact us, and how people see climate in their everyday lives, whether somebody's working as in landscape company or a renter where they have a house, where they have an apartment below the ground and things like that. So working in this group, we figured out that people pass information in a different way. They understand things differently. Things impact them differently. Where they congregate and where they meet was different. So understanding where to meet people where they're at and about what matters to them. So the biggest takeaway for me, besides the fact that, with the heat maps, it was pretty clear that it wasn't just guessing where EJ communities were. The heat map was clearly where you could see minority populations, where there were people below a certain income, people of color, and so forth, literally matched that. And one of the bigger takeaways was at the end of the program, we had deep dive conversations where we had in-depth, we brought people from the community and they spoke about how it impacts their everyday lives. So one of the things was like access to water, cooling water bodies. That is not equitable amongst everyone. So while we have in Natick, we have a little local beach, the cost is so high that by the time you work up for a family, they can't go there when there's very hot in summer, and we've had a lot of problems where only certain people who could afford it would have access to those cooling bodies. And that's not something that the town actually thought about that unless we had these conversations. Different things where not everybody had access to transport. So even simple things like the school activities were not equitable amongst everyone. So if it was after school activities in another town, and if there was no transport, a lot of students were not able to do that. So working in this project was eye-opening to see that we have many more voices that we needed to get on board. And working in this was also birthed the whole me working with Natick and Framingham. This project was done with Natick, Framingham, and Ashland, but Natick and Framingham had co-written a grant for the Community First Partnership for the Mass Save program, and that's when I started working on as the energy advocate. On the right-hand corner, you can see the Ready Framingham. That's just a snapshot of one of the when we did this whole project, we had to have something actionable. So we had many things that we were going to work on from there. And the first part was we decided let's work on making sure that everyone is ready for extreme weather conditions. And so this was part of that project that we worked on, where we went and we had this where we created different tools and resources that in case of emergency, what can you do? Where would you go for when there's a blackout? And there's no, you need a cooling station. Where are the cooling stations and things like that? And then in an emergency, what would you pack in your car? We did 2 iterations, one for heat and one for in cold. When there's snow, when you're stuck in a snowstorm, we did things about getting your car ready, getting your home ready. Where would you go? Created different resources in different ways, and having this diverse group working meant they could create all of this in various formats. Some created in little videos in different languages, and then would easily share to WhatsApp, because we found more communities use WhatsApp than listening to what's on the town website. We had little magnets mailed to all the people in the community that they could stick on their fridge, where they would know where to call immediately. So creating different resources was amazing because we had a diverse set of liaisons already. So creating it all different formats, which municipalities agree that if we just sat amongst a group, we would prepare information in a way that only certain people would access. So that was just opened up the whole thing about how a community engages, how outreach is done. And I'm going to skip to the next slide. So this was, as I started working, one of the first things I did was I realized that we need to stop talking and listening. And it was a huge part of how I approached being an energy advocate was just attending a lot of community events and seeing how information is passed. And one of the things that I did was I borrowed at the top left corner was a little dollhouse, a friend's kids' dollhouse. I borrowed it. I put a sweater on to show how we want to keep our home warm. And I watched how the community approached that. And it was pretty successful because for language isolated places and people who didn't have, who were too nervous to approach tables to talk about it, who felt like they weren't smart enough because English was not their first language, or they didn't know how it related to them because tables are overwhelming. There's just a, deluge of information and they don't know, does it really apply to me? I'm a renter. Does this really impact me? So when the dollhouse worked in drawing people, then I got the community to invest in buying an actual dollhouse. And actually that, was so successful that I think we have over 20 communities that actually bought the same. Even you can see the Mass EC bought the same dollhouse and started using that. We stuffed in insulation on there and we had little notes all over. And based on the event, we changed those little signage to have different languages so people could see visually in my home, what can I do to change that? And also people, the Mass Save program is also funded by anyone who pays utilities. So people who are renters started to realize that, hey, I'm paying into a program and I should take advantage of it too. So that was another thing of how we started drawing outreach. On the top right corner is a little workbook. So I created children's workbooks where we had on the flip side adult action things that they could do because as we watched and learned from the community, we realized a lot of people were with families, and you can't have a conversation if you don't have kids entertained. But we want to still keep it clean energy focused. So everything from coloring pages to filling the blanks, energy related. And then we had an action item that the parent would take home on the flip side of the page. And we had it all together because most parents don't throw away their kids' workbooks. So we thought it was a little sneaky way of getting that information taken home at the end of the event. We can flip to next slide. So outreach is a huge part of what we did, and that's why I dedicated 2 slides on it. So I'm going to just go through a few that we did that I thought was innovative. One created again, playing on the whole visual, played a lot on creating things as visual, smaller, easy, possible information rather than just saying with Massive, you can do all these things. I broke each aspect down into talking about everything from, hey, did you ever realize that ice dams is the result of not insulating your home? So people don't tie those two together. They just call somebody to fix the pipes and things like that. So making it where it was more visual. These cards on the induction stove and the ice dams, I had about 12 different scenarios on little baseball cards, style cards at every event so that people could take back home things that they were interested in, but they had a visual of, hey, you know what, I want to get an induction stove, or I want to get another appliance for my home. So broken into parts that may only address what people are interested at that time. Also, it was more about empowering the community. So making things like where we went in where the community was, like at the bottom middle is a Halloween event at Framingham, where there was already a Halloween event, but we said, let's take it and make it a haunted house where it's a clean energy, non-clean energy home. So all kids entered as an energy vampire, different stations to learn about how they could make things energy efficient in their home. and could touch. There was tactile with everything where they could test out. And at the end, they graduated to being energy wizards. And at the bottom were little badges we made that they graduated to energy wizards because they knew how to make changes. And they also took a little themed. So we changed these baseball cards to be themed based on the event. So they had Halloween stuff on it, but with little takeaways at the moment as well. The lit house that you see at the top there was a 5-foot home that we created out of board, and we lit it up for the tree lighting event, where we asked the community to come in and say how they would, be help the climate in the next year. And that allowed people to answer easily, because it still becomes overwhelming to a lot of people who are not speaking English, to say how would they make small changes. So it involved everyone. Everyone felt like you're not trying to sell me something. And by the end of the night, I think we had several hundred house-shaped post-its with how they would make the community, more involved, and how they would make their home cleaner and greener in 2025. The interesting thing over there was also we had a lot of parents who couldn't speak English ask their children to write out what they wanted on it, so that they could be involved in it. Another collaboration, which I can speak about later in question answers, I collaborated with Wellesley College, because we were stuck with a shortage of resources. So in exchange for a fall program at Wellesley College, they learned about Metro West climate justice, and in exchange, they had to be at these events. And so we had free resources, but also they had a touch point with the community that they're actually learning about in the class. But they got to practice every skill, from their design skills to their language, their translation skills, and so forth. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to just talk about I know I'm rushing through a lot, but I'm trying to get through as much as possible. So working with Natick and Framingham, we had a lot of challenges and we had a lot of strengths. So I'll just run through some of the challenges. Was communication. So there's 2 different municipalities, and then we have a body, All in Energy, that was managing the CFP project, and then we had the utility companies, and then we had like SMOC and things like that, who were handling the low-cost homes. The lower income homes and things like that. So there were so many bodies that it was really a challenge to get everybody to meet at the same time, even though it was just 2 communities. So that was a little difficult. And, talking about having a central coordinator, I think that is an excellent idea, because if there was one body that was in charge of all of it, everybody would be equally invested in it. Having different structures. Natick is a town, and Framingham is a city. So having a select board and having a mayor meant that whatever we wanted to do could move as fast or slow and through different channels. And managing that about who's in charge was very complicated. Also, different investment. Not all municipalities are equally invested in the project, and not all municipalities have the same resources and time to dedicate to the project. The other part is there's always a high turnover in municipalities, and so dealing with that, dealing with the timing issues. Some of the municipality staff have part-time or different times of days. So getting all of that in when we want to do something with the senior center or the library was always a challenge. Also, different demographic. When I worked with Natick, it was the non-English speaking was a lot of Spanish, and when it was with Framingham, it was predominantly Portuguese. So understanding how you can build resources for everything and building something that works for all become difficult. So when I was working with Framingham, I focused a lot on the renter population and Portuguese, and in Natick, we did a lot. The Jeopardy board, you see at the bottom, those are Wellesley students working with me, where we build a Jeopardy game, and that intentional spelling error there, because we didn't want to use the word Jeopardy. But it was basically to make it fun and engaging with senior citizens. And also different focuses. The community is different. When I tabled at Natick events, people would walk up and say, hey, when are you sorting out the EV charger and things like that? while in Framingham it was, well, can we get insulation? So the focus, obviously the economic difference in both matter, but understanding that so that how you can target your message for each population. And just in general, the delays taking from one to the other, how fast you move between projects is the delays that help, that make it a lot more challenging, how fast you can reach your goals. The strengths, though, there were so many strengths that I think this is a phenomenal what you guys are trying to do, is that you can reuse so many things. So like, see, I have the bikes at the bottom, bikes which we had the community donate, but we had this where people could generate electricity. And we had these two events, Natick and Framingham, happening at the same time on Earth Day. And in Natick, you can see our director of sustainability, Julian, they're riding the bike. And as people ride the bike, the Power the Future sign is up and lit. And also, we have a mock heat pump there with streamers. So as people ride the bike, it lights up and it blows out streamers. And in Natick, we had a little marquee board powered by you. There, you can't see clearly, but there's lights around the powered by you. As people rode that bike, it lit up the whole powered by you. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of reuse of materials. There's a lot of savings of cost because you can reuse people and whatever things you build, like the 5-foot home that we built, we could use it in both. There's also the benefit was we did a lot of joint grant applications. So the more people that you get joining the grant applications, the higher chance they get approved. So we applied for other grants from there, and I worked on the REACH, the municipal racial equity program. So we managed to do that working with both Natick and Framingham. From that, we also realized that we needed to take it to the people. From the top pictures at a food bank where we had to find engaging ways to draw people. The worst part is like when you go to a food bank, you're trying to, run a pitch to people who are just there to collect their food. So we found ways like, let's get them bags so that they can carry out their groceries and put information in it so that they can take it home and still maintain their dignity and not have to feel that they have to listen to a pitch before they get their food for their home. And also we realized, let's just take this opened a bridge for what else can we do. So we pitched to the town that how about we take town hall to the people, and we managed to do that for Natick, where we set up a mobile town hall right in it, the EJ community, where we could not just do this energy efficiency, but everything from vaccination, registering to vote, and everything else. Because as we spoke more to the town, they realized we needed this bridge as well. So if you can help us, because they noticed the voting was lower in those age in that EJ community. It was also the vaccination rates were also lower. So it helped everyone once we opened the bridge, and that's what I'll say. Just don't keep limited to what you're doing, because once you open this bridge and you keep it ongoing, the sky's the limit of what you can do. And I hope I didn't go over time. Thank you.
So much, Neri. What a wonderful way to round out the panel and ground us in reality. So thank you so much. Yeah, I would like to open the floor for any questions that you may have. Please feel free to use the raise hand function, drop your questions in the chat, or just unmute and ask. Any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sort of curious, the three different programs, sort of offer a range of different subjects and topics. And I guess I'm curious, whether whether combining the energy aspects of climate with the kind of more resilience, harm reduction kind of aspects, sort of whether the municipalities see that as a key combination. And I'm just sort of making that observation because as a watershed group, we have often been focused more on the resilience piece because that's a little closer to our historical mission of, you know, taking care of the river. But I sort of wonder, and this is maybe a question for other Neponset municipalities who are in the area, sort of whether in the minds of municipalities, both sides of this equation are closely linked, and that makes more sense for a partnership to focus on both sides of that equation.
I will say, Ian, having been a town planner of a community that does not necessarily have all of the staff in place to maybe manage some of those particular things, what I'll say is that, and Angela may have some insight into this, but when I was town planner in Southbridge, there was the Green Communities program, and the town plan, they were priming me to be the energy person for that. And that was not necessarily something that I was ever trained in. But what I'm seeing in some communities is that the planning department is in charge of energy, but they also happen to be in charge of stormwater and some of the resilience measures. So I think understanding that the planning departments typically have some sort of hand in many of those particular decisions. I see it here in the Pioneer Valley where, um, those conversations are happening. And even so, if there are people like Neary, and I'm talking with one community where they have an energy advocate, and there was a grant that came out, and I helped put that grant together, is housed in the DPW department. And obviously that is, something where a lot of those conversations are in place, and it probably makes sense to understand what each side is doing. But I will say that here in the Pioneer Valley, I think because of the lack of staff and capacity for many of these communities, you'll find them in the same kind of with the same person or within the same department.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate exactly what Ken said. Prior to PVPC, I had 13 years in a municipal position doing conservation work, and most of it was all on me. Lucky enough, it was a full-time job. But when I did first start, I was working for 3 different towns and trying to juggle it around and make my own full-time job. Because it is really hard in Western Mass. Most commissions have 0 staff and barely have enough volunteers to fill the board, let alone trying to get a clerk or a paid professional.
Heather, go ahead.
Excellent presentations. Nira, I particularly found some of those incredibly creative outreach strategies really inspiring. I want to try some of them. I'm going to echo a little bit of what the last speaker said. I think even if a community has the funds to, hire somebody to do each of these different aspects of dealing with the climate issue, it's also hard to find people who are experts at all of these things, who have the interest in doing all of them, really. And so I think in my experience in a few communities, you tend to do the best that you can. The community prioritizes it. It's like, okay, well, we might have the funding for one position, and who's the best person we can get, and what are their connections already, because everything's very interdisciplinary. So you end up with every community having something slightly different. So to your question, Ian, I think absolutely we should be tying both the energy piece and the resiliency together, but it's hard to do that. They're usually, housed in different departments, and to be fully honest about it, here there have been times where I've jokingly said, I don't want to be the climate person, you know, because I don't want that to take from what I mean is I don't want to do the energy auditing and that piece of it because it's not my area of expertise. And I'm afraid it will take away from like the restoration work I'm doing or the education piece or something like that. Not that I don't think it's important. So maybe the answer is, you know, helping communities realize you can't ignore any of these aspects that you have to deal with all of them, but bite off what you can, you know, in small pieces and, you know, having like NEPRA to support, you know, the parts that a municipality can't do, I find really helpful. So like we don't really have an energy person right now, but we have in the past. But now we have somebody who's really focused on resiliency. So yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Van, go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. I really appreciate that honesty and and for sharing that. And you know, I think it also reflects, for example, in Ben's presentation, the source, you know, model, right? Like even that there's an energy and then there's a resilience person. Like there has to be sort of like a team, or at least kind of some sort of collaborations to make it happen. I guess I'm curious, and I want to kind of throw the question back to you and everyone in the collaborative, as well as to the speaker too. Like, what would it take? I don't know. I'm crafting my questions. What would it take, or like, how can we help, or how can we help you, like, you know, to influence, and or like what would be the mechanism needed to make that happen in terms of having like not looking for a unicorn who can do both energy and mitigation, or resilience, because that's everyone's looking for that, like, you know, the best of the money, but there's no such person. That's just like a setup for failure, I think. But like, how can we help? Like, what would be the mechanism to like help build pressure and or like to convince your municipality, whether it's staff or select board, like to make this happen so that, like, you know, it's not just like one person who is just doing the grant writing on everything, but like to set up a team that can support you like in this interdisciplinary way. Not just a question to Heather, but like maybe you have some idea, but open this up to everyone in the collaborative to chime in.
Any thoughts?
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I raised my
No,
physical
go ahead.
hand. So is the question how MAPC can help do that on behalf of the communities that are on this call?
I mean, we can try to help too, but you know, there's also NEPRA, like every like NEPRA and keep in mind. So right now, then this climate collaborative for the Neponset watershed, we're working on a work plan identifying priorities and things to move forward, you know, with regional efforts. So yeah, I guess it's not like how can we as an entity can help, but like how can we, I guess, collectively can make this happen.
Do you feel like collecting data on the real like externalities of some of these improvements is always really helpful and compelling? And so whether that's, you know, someone did a, you know, a building assessment and it led to energy efficiency, and like, you know, how much did you decrease the utility bill for this municipal building or this school building, or what's the data on implementing a white roof in terms of like this is how much that's reduced, like bringing all of that into like a 1 or 2 pager to showcase, I guess, to the governing bodies or the bodies that are going to make the ultimate decision to either like contribute funding for a staff position, or are going to give consent to even do the project in the first place. I think that is really helpful because usually when there's opposition, it's because people think that it's a frivolous activity. And so I think that if there was a way to like bring in real examples that have created an improvement and like either saved money or had some type of tangible outcome, that might convince those groups that typically aren't just automatically on board because it's altruistic and it's environmental justice and it's, some of the sensibilities that I think everybody on this group shares already. Of course we're going to do that. Like, we know that this impacts people. So something like that.
Go ahead, Heather. Thanks, Ben.
Nice. I guess I feel compelled a bit to answer now. It's a really excellent question. It gets at the heart of it. And I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I keep thinking about that last presentation, and it really resonated with me that you have to kind of meet people where they are and maybe break off small pieces that they can tackle. Because I think even at the municipal level, it can sometimes be like that. It's one thing to be a green community, but if you're not at that stage, it can be very overwhelming to start with, an energy audit of all of your buildings. Or maybe you are there, but what's next? Now that we set the bar so high, the next action has to be equally huge, and very impactful. I think that can be very overwhelming. And so, I like what Ben said about providing some data for people. And I'm also thinking, could that be part of like a toolbox of things? So for example, a white roof. A lot of people don't know what that is. I mean, most people know what a green roof is. It's blue roofs too. I don't know if that's being pushed now, but but maybe having some simple fact sheets, where you want to do something, consider XYZ for your municipal buildings. And maybe it doesn't have to involve changing every single one of your buildings, but maybe it's, hey, guess what? This is a technology that you can consider next time that you're renovating the roofs. Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I think there's still, it's the educational journey is ongoing. There's still, we need to keep that going as well. Neri, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess my perspective is different because while I was at the municipality, I was always on the meeting end for community. I think the way when I look at this role or whatever, somebody been in there, I feel like it's really hard to ask one person of all of these things. So I feel like somebody that's there and any person that's there or body needs to probably just know connections, because I think like from education, there's a lot of people who already have that. So I feel like it more is a collaborator of everything and knowing where to find it and connection. The one thing that I found is education is something somebody else has perfected. When we were trying to promote and build all these materials, we found that people have written books and have the same massive thing that we're trying to show. There was a children's book launch, Energy Detective. And instead of us creating everything all the time, that we had actually worked with them and they shared their books. So what I'm saying is like the energy advocate and the MVP, I think there's a lot of overlap, but I feel it's more should be like a toolbox, or more that we have a set of resources, and rather than a person having the expertise, but creating these resources. That is it education, where are we going to people to convince at the top? We take numbers and go, we take it to the bottom, then we start showing people about how it impacts them. So I look at it more as like modules, and that's something I try to create, things that can be used by different groups, because it's the same thing whether you in different departments. There's so much of overlap of information, and there's so much of recreation of the same thing. And sometimes, it works better if we just create repositories that everybody pulls out depending on who the audience is.
That's very true. Thank you. Any other questions or any additional comments?
So I see that Larry and Stoughton has a question about whether EPA might be hit with some of the federal cuts that are coming. And I did see something over the weekend about EPA staff being laid off and then being rehired right away. So while I don't think this particular project, this Neponset Collaborative, will be necessarily affected by the federal grants because this is completely state funded through the MVP grant, I do wonder about some of those federal grants that cities and towns use to implement resiliency projects and sustainability projects. And so I think time will tell, what kind of funding is available for that. But we are very hopeful that this particular project will continue to move forward. I don't know if anybody else
Thanks,
has any
Carrie.
thoughts.
Any other questions or comments? All right. I have a really quick open question for all the speakers. I'm just generally curious, and I recognize this might be a little abstract, but since you've been working with so many communities and so many different models of providing, assistance and just coordinating, that's a massive effort, right? So is there anything that you can think of that, you had you been able to go back and tell yourself, this is something I wish I had known, which would have made for like smoother sailing? Is there anything like that that you can think of that you've seen through the process that would have been really good to know or be aware of when you started out?
One of the big things for me is just being conscious that the dynamic of each town you're working with is very different. And so is the skill set of the board and or committee you're working with as well. So being sensitive to that and always starting first by building trust with the community. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, Angela. Right, Ben, go ahead.
I would say Angela's spot on with that last comment. And I think that I think looking back, like it would have been beneficial to kind of engage all three communities about the prospect of the office before it started. And I think building like a work plan based on like you need to do some level of prioritization of what the community thinks is most important, but like also I recommend thinking about what a climate practitioner thinks is the most important, and then grabbing those things that are the same touch points. Because if you're gonna if the first thing you're gonna do is everyone's gonna do a composting program, like that's great, we love composting, but that's not the biggest slice of the pie in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so you don't want to start with projects that are just going to appease the community, but you also don't want to start with things that are like completely outside of the realm of what people think about when they go to think about sustainability and resiliency. So you need a good mixture of both, and you also need to be okay with the fact that like a municipality, some of them don't have the same capabilities or capacity that you have to even steward the office. And so one of those people or places is going to carry some of that weight. And so when you agree to regionalize something like this, you need to be aware that just like a group project, like someone needs to be the leader, and it's not going to be a perfect split. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben. I think that was really insightful, and we are developing a work plan, so we'll be sure to consider all of these. I recognize we're at time, so I will pass it over to Kay to close us out.
All right, so let's get you guys out of here. So what are the next steps for this? We will be having our final collaborative steering committee meeting in April. We'll hold another public meeting for this project where we will focus on the work that the collaborative will have completed by June. Just hot off the presses today, the MVP RFR is out, and we are looking to continue this project into a phase 3, and would love to know from you, you know, if you have any other thoughts other than what's in the work plan. You know, what would be helpful for your community as we continue to do this work regionally? Is it a regional coordinator? Is it, you know, something else? You can put it in the chat or shoot me an email later after you've had some time to think about it. But that's what we're working on next. So I just want to thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I am going to stick here in the chat a link for those of you who are here representing your town. Make sure you're logging your time for the in-kind match for this MVP grant. If you have any questions, follow up with me. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to our speakers. Lots of great
Yes.
examples.
Thanks,
Yep.
Ken
Thank
and
you so
Joanne and
much.
Yuri.